Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and we're back with why this class is awesome. And we're just gonna hop right into it today. There's a lot of stuff going on the channel currently, but if you're curious about that, I recommend you go and check it out. But I have way too much to talk about as far as that is concerned. And this video is actually probably not going to be as long as we're going to be talking about the Wizard. Now, the Wizard is probably, well, it is in my top 5 classes. I really have always liked Wizard aesthetics. I always enjoy the Spellcaster aesthetic. And the Wizard always embodies what I really like in Spellcasters, which is not just someone who has magical powers, but someone who seeks, understands, and learns and enjoys the process of doing so. And the Wizard just embodies that. The Arcane spell list, which is the only spell list the Wizard has access to, is the longest spell list in the game, as of least right now, but historically it's always been the biggest, it's always been the longest. It's got the most utility, it's got good damage, it's just a really good spell list overall. And while it doesn't have some of the more, like, support abilities, like healing, it can do pretty much anything else. It's a really, really good spell list. And not only that, but the Wizard themselves typically has access to the most spells as far as like what they can cast in a day. Now, to me, that's a bit of an argument. I would say Wizards would struggle to have more spells at their disposal than, say, a Druid or Oracle or Cleric who... I don't even think Oracle, actually. No, I think it's just Druid and Cleric who just have access to their whole spell list all the time, and they prepare them that way. Wizards would have to spend a lot of money to do it that way, and we're going to get into that fact a little bit later. But the Wizard overall is a very good spellcaster. They're a pure spellcaster. Their class abilities pretty much all line up with that, and they get all the same kind of things that other pure spellcasters do. They get a criminally low amount of skills, 2+ intelligence, and, whatever else, something might give them in their class, which I find is really, really weird. They are an intelligence-based class, so obviously that they'll get more skills than some of the other classes, but at least other classes get 4+ skills. It's a really weird balancing choice in my eyes, but, I didn't make the game, so who knows. Wizards are still really good in my opinion, though, and they're probably one of the best spellcasters just for the fact of their pure versatility they get and the pure focus they have on spellcasting. And speaking of, Wizards are the only class that gets 2 kind of like subclassy options. They get an Arcane Thesis, and they get access to the Arcane Schools. And we'll get into both of those here in a bit. But as I've said before in prior videos, Pathfinder 2e does not have a subclass system. You shouldn't look at it that way. All the classes have a wide variety of ways they can be played based on your personal choices. These are just some of the things that Wizards can do to tune themselves a little bit more. And some of their choices are a little bit more bland than others. But let's go ahead and talk about the Arcane Thesis, shall we? So the Arcane Thesis is where the Wizards kind of learn their theory. Well, okay, so Wizards are nerds. They go to colleges and then they have to write a 500-page thesis on some magical thing. It's really silly, and it doesn't make sense for the game as a whole, because obviously you would think that wizards that go through the academy would have higher level spells than like a level 1 character does, but whatever. So wizards have an Arcane Thesis, right? And these theses can change how some of their magic works or some of their class features. One of them is the Familiar Attunement, which is you gain access to the familiar feat, so you get an extra feat from this. And not only that, you start off with an extra familiar ability, and as you level up, you gain more familiar abilities without necessarily needing to take feats. You pretty much get the same benefit that the Witch does. A really good feature if you really like familiars and what they can do, and honestly, if you're kind of a mega brain individual and can get the most out of your familiars, it's a really good thesis to pick up. I actually really enjoy this one. Metamagic Experimentation is another really interesting one that, again, is a little bit Megamind. A lot of stuff you'll find with the Wizard, and I think one of the reasons why I like it is it requires a little bit more thought in general. And so with the Wizard, the Metamagic Experimentation gives you an additional feat at level 1. That's an extra Metamagic feat. And then at 4th level and pretty much from there on, at the beginning of the day, you can prep any Metamagic feats that's at least half your level or lower. So you get pretty much 2 free feats, and they're focused purely on Metamagic. And Metamagic, if you don't know, is how you alter spells, either extending their range, widening their blast areas. Some of them can do some even more crazy things. Some of the feats we'll actually talk about later will be focused on this one. So Metamagic Experimentation is, I think, a really, really good one if you know how to get the most out of the Metamagics. Spell blending has been one of those theses. Thesii? I don't know. A thesis that I don't know how I feel about it. So when it does is you sacrifice 2 spell slots to get a spell slot of 2 levels higher than that spell, than the spell slot. I think it also, let me double check real quick. It isn't limited on, nope, there's no limit. So yeah, it can go up to the highest level spell slot that you can cast. You can also trade 1 spell slot for 2 cantrips, and you can only do that once. The other type you can do as much as you want. So you can sacrifice 4 level 1 spells. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't. Well, you can. You can sacrifice 4 level 1 spells, and you can get a level 3 spell and a level 2 spell, because you can only get 1 spell slot, 1 level of spell slot in doing this. So you can essentially increase your number of spells and higher spell levels by 1. And you can even increase them up to your highest spell level, which is really nuts. And while you're sacrificing some of your low level spells, honestly, at certain level 1 spells just aren't very handy. And so personally, I would sacrifice 2 level 1 spells for a level 3 spell slot. Hell yeah, I'd even do that for level 2 spells and level 3 spells. Getting an extra 5th level spot, an extra 4th level slot, really, really good. I mean, there's a level where you eventually just probably shouldn't do that. You're losing way too much spell versatility for it. But there's a lot you can do with this, and I don't know the exact balancing for this. I don't know how exactly it works in a game. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about how broken spell blending is, so I'm assuming it's not necessarily the worst thing out there as far as an arcane thesis. But I will say one of the things about it is that it gives you the opportunity to get the most out of your spell slots, because honestly, when you're at higher level, you're not using all your spell slots, and you're not likely to use your low level spell slots because you just have more bang for your buck with your higher level ones. Heck, even your cantrips will just do more damage than your level 1 or 2 spells eventually. So there's no point in keeping those spell slots around when you can literally use them to get more cantrips or more spells that are actually going to be useful for you. So I do think this is a really good thing. And again, it's a unique feature to the Wizard that gives them more access to, use different kinds of spells. I think this is a really good thesis. Spell Substitution is a really good thesis. It's just not good in combat. You can spend 10 minutes to swap a spell out. And again, let me double check. There's so many rules and stipulations. Nope, there's no limit. So you can even swap out your higher level spell slots if you want. This is a really good one. If you want to go just full combat and then have the ability to swap to a more useful spell, or a more like an exploration spell, this is a really good thesis. Spell Substitution is just one of those ones. Well, okay, so let me drop some homebrew on you that I use in my games, and let me give you the reasoning for it. I give all wizards this particular thesis free, and then they can pick another thesis on top of it. The reason why, I do understand it's very strong. You can't use it in combat, though. It takes 10 minutes. So what this does is allows your players to have their combat spells ready when they need it, but if a situation comes up that they, need to do some exploration stuff, they can swap to the spells as they need to. Now, yes, the wizard has a lot of spells that they get access to, kind of. Wizards, as they level up, don't learn more spells necessarily than prepared spellcasters. They have to actually go and use the spell subscribing action to put them into their spell book, which takes time and which takes gold. And at low levels, the gold is pretty non-consequential, and there's even feats that you can reduce the amount of gold you need for it, really. But at high levels, it's brutal. You're trading magic items to add some spells to your spell list. Now, this can be balanced in a whole bunch of ways. The GM can just hand wave it and just say the time you spend is enough. But personally, I feel like to keep the wizards on the same time scale and not to make them a burden on the party, to spend a bunch of money. Well, to spend a bunch of money, yes. To spend a bunch of time, yes. But the thing is, the money is actually going. So for witches and wizards, I give them both this ability because they otherwise are spending stupid amounts of gold to add to their spell list. Witches can pick up spell scrolls and just like shove them into their familiar. So that one is kind of, like you could take it away from witch and I don't think that'd be a big issue. But for wizards, I recommend just giving all wizards access to this. Yes, it makes them probably the best exploration class in the game. Gives them a lot of versatility that other classes don't. But I feel like it's worth it because they spend more gold than any other class does just to get, spells. Even more than martial fighters who need to buy like constantly better equipment. Wizards need equipment too. They need magic items, and then they need spells. They just spend more money than other classes, and I feel like they shouldn't be overly penalized for it. So I like this arcane thesis, and honestly, if the wizard really wanted it, they could just take the thesis anyway, and then you can't even say anything about it. So I would just give it to all of them. Don't restrict their gameplay. Don't force them to choose, different styles. And I in the 10-minute thing, I think balances it out really well. One more thesis, and this is actually my favorite thesis. It's Staff Nexus. It pretty much gives your wizard a very hard focus on the staff. And the staff, I think, is really cool. You start with the staff at level 1 that has a first level spell in it and a cantrip. I like it. The only thing about the first level version of the staff that I don't like is that it doesn't charge normally. You have to put spell slots into it. So essentially, you're just using a spell slot to use a spell as you would normally. It does give you a little bit more versatility on the kind of spells you can have prepared, but not really because you're sacrificing a spell slot. When it gets better is when you upgrade to another staff. You can essentially blend this staff into another staff, giving that staff not only the spells that were in your staff, but you're also getting more out of it. And not only that, but as you level up, you can actually overcharge the staff by putting more spell slots in it. Other spellcasters can only put use one spell slot to charge the staff up to give it more charges, but you can do eventually up to 3, which I think is really cool. I think that these games definitely don't put enough emphasis on the spell tome and the spell staff that these characters are using to channel their magic. And honestly, it's just something that I feel like a lot of classes really should put more emphasis on. And I think Staff Nexus really does that for the wizard. All right, so now that we're done with that, we're going to talk about the Arcane Schools. Now, there's not a whole lot I'm going to say about this one. They have some versatility that they can do. Your wizard can either focus on a particular type of school, which doesn't do much more than you learn an extra spell at level 1 from that school, and you get access to a focus spell. Some of these focus spells are, in fact, really, really good. Protective Ward is from the Abjuration school, I think is really good. It gives you the ability to kind of create a little bubble around you, and it increases all ACs by a status bonus, which is good because this does stack with item bonuses from armor and circumstance bonuses from shields. So this is actually a really good, and it gives you a 5-foot bubble around you, and every turn that you sustain it, because you have to sustain it for up to a minute. We don't have to sustain it for a minute, but you have to sustain it or it goes away. The shield expands up to 30 feet radius, which is really good and makes your wizard very valuable as far as like making your team harder to hit. It's a really good, focus spell you can get. And some of the other focus spells I think are also really good as well. Evocation gets Force Bolt, which is a 1-action magic missile. I don't like the fact that it's a magic missile that you only fire, you get an extra missile every time you go up to, it heightens +2. So at first level, third level, fifth level, every odd level, you get another bolt and it does 1 1d4 plus 1 per, heightens level. I don't know why they did it this way. Maybe it's just because it doesn't miss, and it doesn't. It does force damage, which is not very resisted, and it's a single action. So if your wizard is moving and needs to, is moving, so they're not going to be able to use a 2-action spell, or they're doing something else, they can toss this out. It's pretty much guaranteed damage. It does pretty good guaranteed damage. I don't know. I feel like Force Bolt is one of the ones that I personally am not overly excited about, but I do think Force Bolt's a good one nonetheless. And not only that, but for many of the schools, you can get feats later on that give them extra stuff, extra abilities, extra focus spells, all that other kind of stuff. I think there's some good stuff with that, but I think a lot of players default to the Universalist. The Universalist is for a very particular reason. The Universalist gets access to Drain Bonded Item, or what's it called? One second here. It's called Drain Bonded Item once per day per spell level. So equivalently, what it does is the wizard gains access to an additional spell slot per spell level. To be fair, it has to be, you're reusing a spell slot, so it has to be a spell that you've prepared. But nonetheless, that just means that you're getting an extra spell slot per spell level, making you equal out to the sorcerer as far as spells that you can cast in a day. I think that this is a trap for a lot of players, and I think that this game design choice here is what really hurt. Not many players take the other schools, because why would you? The summoning augmentation one that you get from the conjuration tree, for instance, it gives all it gives a summon as a single action and a focus point, +1 on all its checks, which includes DCs and AC. It's okay, but summons are always lower level than you, so they're not necessarily great against bosses. It can help, and it can be really good for dealing with the chaff, but it's not a very strong feature. Getting upwards of 9 spells, when you get to 9th level spellcasting, is really good. 9 spell slots is really, really solid. And if you mix this with spell combination, or the thesis I mentioned earlier, combinable spell, spell blending, that's what it was. Sorry, spell blending. Then you're essentially trading some spell slots to get even more higher level spells. It's a really good one. Not only that, but you get access to an additional feat at level 1. Well, you get access to a feat at level 1 with this. So you get a feat over other wizards, and you get extra spell slots. One of the only thing, and you can pick any other spell. You can pick any school of spell for the additional spell added to your spells list, which is okay. It's not a super big feature, but the thing that saves this, and I think the thing that if your GM allows you to do, is the Rune Lord archetype. Now, I don't talk about archetypes a lot in these kind of videos. That's not the point. The Rune Lord archetype is wizard specific. You have to have a spell, or you have to have a school to do so. I think you could possibly do this with, archetyping into wizard and then taking Rune Lord, but I'm not sure. I don't think it works that way. I think you have to be a wizard. You have to pick a school. And then when you go with Rune Lord, and I can make a whole video on Rune Lord, but here's the basics of what Rune Lord is. And it's probably going to be scrolling here on screen so you can read it there. You focus on your type of school that you're focusing on at the cost of prohibiting 2 schools from your list. And you can't pick divination, because divination's for nerds, obviously, and the Rune Lords don't care about nerds. So yeah, for instance, abjuration, you can't use evocation or necromancy spells, which is pretty rough because evocation's all your damage spells. But you can pick one of these, and not only that, you gain an additional focus spell based on the type of sin you associate yourself with. And not only that, you get an extra focus point at level 1, meaning your character has a little bit more diversity with focus spells, which are typically really good. On top of that, you gain access to a glaive as a martial weapon, giving your wizard at least something a little bit more if you want to have a martial weapon. And when you level up, you can restore focus points like an oracle does. You don't have to spend feats to get higher refocuses. You just automatically have a higher refocus as long as your character is partaking in the sin. And I feel like this is a very problematic archetype. I understand the lore implications behind it. I feel like this is problematic roleplay wise because they're based on, sins. And I don't really like the implications. I think it can be done in a tasteful way, and this doesn't mean that characters are inherently bad. I am saying that when given to the general populace, this is going to cause issues. That's just how it goes. But the Rune Lords also get access to sewing Aeon stones into their skin and attuning to them that way so they can't be stolen. Pretty metal. They also get access to tattoos, arcane tattoos that you can do through some of their feats. You can also combine a staff with a glaive. They get a lot of really cool things. And so this is what I feel makes some of the schools a much more interesting choice for some of the wizards. And if you're picking evocation, then yeah, you lose some versatility and you lose some of that exploration activity, because I think it's abjuration and conjuration that you lose from evocation, if I'm not mistaken. But on the flip side, you gain like spell mastery. You can counterspell those spells more easily. You can deflect those spells more easily. It's really, really good. I think that this makes the schools a lot better of a choice. It is a rare option. Your GM has to let you, but honestly, players won't pick the schools unless you do this, unless you have a very particular character idea. Drain bonded item is way too good and to be fair, all wizards get access to drain bonded item. Universalists can just do it per spell level, so they get it multiple times up to your number of times of your spell levels. I don't know. I think the schools are interesting, but I think the Rune Lord is what pushes them over the edge for me personally. It doesn't have to for you. And if you're using free archetype, it's really good. I don't know. Anyway, this video is probably going to be a little bit longer than I was expecting. It's hard. I get so excited about some of these classes, and especially something like Wizard, which is one of my favorites. So we're going to go over just a few of their feats that I really like. The first feat we're going to talk about is Overwhelming Energy, which is the most wizardy sounding feat you can get. It's a really great meta magic, and if you have a very elemental style build, which, there's an archetype for being an elementalist. Again, archetypes in the video, I know, but still, like, if you have a particular elemental style of caster you want to use, Overwhelming Energy is really great. As long as the creature is not immune, you bypass all resistances to the type of energy damage of the spell. It is a meta magic, so you're kind of dedicating your whole turn to it most of the time. There are some single action spells, but you're probably using a 2-action spell to cast this. Get that really good blow in. If you're going up against a demon that typically has resistance to like fire damage or cold damage or whatever, this is a really good, meta magic you can use against those kind of enemies. And not only that, but it also applies if the spell does persistent spell damage or any other kind of lingering effect. The enemy still does not have resistance to that kind of spell, as it supersedes that resistance. It's a really, really good meta magic. It's really important for some character like styles, some character archetypes, and honestly, it's just a really good spell if you want to use things like Fireball and a lot of the good old faithful damaging spell on the spell list, as most of the wizards' damaging spells are energy based, and it doesn't feel good when those get resisted. So this is a really good feat to pick up, and it's a really good meta magic to add to your list. The next feat I want to mention is Scroll Savant. Now this is another feat that kind of helps the prepared spell list weakness of lack of versatility. At the beginning of the day, as long as you're an expert in spellcast or an expert in crafting, you make 2 scrolls that are 2 levels lower than your highest spell level. So at the time you can get this one, you can cast 6th level spells. That means that these scrolls can be up to 4th level, and they cannot be the same spell. So they have to be 2 different spells of 4th level or lower, and it's always 2 levels lower than your highest spell slot. Hopefully everyone understands that. It's really good. You can throw things like water breathing into these scrolls, or whatever. They're really good scrolls, especially because scrolls require an action to activate in combat before you can cast with them, unless you have some other scroll-based feats. This is a really good feat to pick up because you can have more offensive capabilities prepared for the day and not have to worry about some of the more utility things you may or may not need. I think this is a really good feat to pick up, and not only that, but as your crafting increases, you can get additional scrolls, up to 4 scrolls when you get to legendary in crafting. Having crafting is also really good. You can make potions. You make a lot of things with crafting. So it's something that, you definitely will benefit from. And you might as well. The wizard doesn't have a lot of feats that I think are really, really all that great. Not like some of the other classes. So something like this that helps get by one of the weaknesses and it helps them focus on a skill that is really handy for the party is really good. This is a good feat to pick up if you want to add a little bit more utility to your kit without sacrificing some of the offensive capabilities of your spell list. The last feat we're going to talk about is going to be Infinite Possibilities. This is a really good feat for a lot of reasons. And again, this is another feat that tries to bypass the weakness of prepared spellcasting. You take a spell slot, you reduce it by 2 levels. So if you have an 8th level spell slot, it becomes a 6th level spell slot. But this 6th level spell slot has infinite possibilities as far as any 6th level or lower spell, probably a 6th level spell or heightened to 6th level anyway, that's in your spell book can be used in this spell slot. It doesn't have a spell prepared in it until you actually use it. This is really good, especially in combat, because you never know what spells might be really handy. You might have a spell perfect for a situation. So this spell slot with infinite possibilities is a really good tool to use. You do lose some of your higher spell, firepower. You do lose a spell slot at your highest spell level, maybe. It doesn't have to be your highest spell level. It can be any spell slot reduced by 2. But honestly, you get a decent level powered spell slot and you can use any spell that you need. This is really good for versatility in combat. And not only that, but again, outside of combat, this is also useful if there's you need a spell in a certain situation, you need to get out of a certain situation or whatever. This infinite possibility spell slot is just really good. I find it interesting that a lot of the wizard feats are based around getting around preparing spell slots, essentially, which is why I like my personal homebrew for it. And again, I've already mentioned all that stuff about it, so whatever. But I think compared to other prepared spellcasters, wizards have the most flexibility. They have the biggest spell list over other spell lists, and they get a lot of feats and abilities that can help swap their spells in. Some of their other feats as well are really good for focusing on counter spells, reflecting spells back at people, or whatever. I think the wizard is the master of magic. They use magic better than any other class. Not necessarily have more firepower, not necessarily have more, specialized kind of spell casting, but when it comes to learning to manipulate magic, to use the spell list to your whim, you want to be a wizard. And I think the wizard is really awesome. And with that, we're going to end this session here today. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Keep an eye on the channel. We got a lot of things coming up. Join the Discord linked down below in the description to get the possibility to, talk with us. We also talk about things like Warhammer 40K and other tabletop systems, as well as you can possibly join us in some of our games. I've put out some recruitment calls lately to join for a playtest for the game system I'm developing, as well as we're doing a Lancer one-shot later this month. So if you want more info on that, check us out down in the description below. And, the possibility to play with me and my friends in the future. So good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.